words can cure physical ailments. It's a really cool thing. I wonder how much it's developed in the last 100 years.
If I can ask, can I go back and ask Sam a question? Sam was sharing that he didn't think the way that it's set up now is working well. Sam, if you had a magic wand, like what would you do different?
Ooh, the magic question. I would start in colleges. I would, for biology majors or bio-related majors who are pre-meds, I would require a class on brain function, mental health, etc. Then I would provide a great deal of scholarships to attract people to go into psychiatry once they graduate from medical school. I would do everything I can to increase the number of psychiatrists so that we basically have, per capita the same number of psychiatrists as we have plastic surgeons who do nose jobs. And then that would provide more mental health providers at larger facilities that can then take insurance and help poor people like me.
Do you? Oh, go ahead, Denise. I was just going to ask a follow-up question, just really quick. So my understanding is that, and from having clients who were medical residents and et cetera, they oftentimes are choosing different specializations in psychiatry. And it's my understanding, though, correct me if I'm off on this. It's my understanding that psychiatry medical doctors do not get paid as well as, say, like a plastic surgeon, either over time or, right out the gate. And so, do you see that as part of the problem, is sort of how
the teachers don't make enough money.
How would you dig into that even deeper?
I don't know. I haven't studied that, so I don't know what the causes are. But I think though I don't know for a fact, but I would guess that the general cultural view of mental health, which is not seen as something that's real, that's serious, that you're just, being silly, that, well, why don't you, what do you mean you're depressed? Just get up and do your work, that kind of thing. And the thing that, what, you say I'm crazy? I'm not crazy, you're crazy. So people have this cultural block, stigma for mental health. And I think that affects medical students and those who choose residencies as well.
Well, and the cost for any medical education is so prohibitive that it makes sense you're going to pick the if we let the market continue to drive how we develop doctors, people are going to pick dermatology, plastic surgery. You're going to have people focus their energies, if they can, on the ones that have the biggest ROI, right? So this is the same problem that is being experienced with rural healthcare and with general practitioners. Like, we don't have enough and don't have a plan or a path to get to enough, because right now the market drives, specialty choices, the decisions around what specialties people elect.
I heard Chinga, and I want to say that's even going to be getting worse because the SAVE loan forgiveness path is heavily under attack right now. And for some of us who thought, how am I going to pay back my loans? We thought, okay, I'm going to go work in a rural area or an underserved community or at a prison or, at a VA hospital where we're going to be able to get our loans forgiven after 10 years without the tax bomb at the end of the 10 years. And what's going to be happening now is a lot of us are sort of floating out in the water. Now we've got all this debt, and our path to forgiveness is now doubled or tripled. Plus, at the end of it, whatever's forgiven with all this compounded interest is going to become a tax bomb that's going to bankrupt us. So, that's fun.
Well, wait, did you get your answer? Was that part of the conversation done, or before we move?
Sorta. I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about something that is such essential need to a society, right? I think that as we operate within the practice of capitalism, it's very much like, supply and demand. Like, people need doctors, so we'll get doctors. And I think we keep getting all of this data that says that's not in fact what happens, right? And that there are these strange market forces that are skewing kind of where people end up. But then, tomorrow if there's a school shooting, we'll hear a million people say, well, it's not the guns, it's just we need more mental health services. Yeah, but how are you going to get those mental health services? And now we're challenging foreign students coming in to learn to operate in our to be in our schools. Well, I mean, that's who the doctors are. So I'm just curious, kind of on the macro level of like, this feels like a worsening problem that we don't really have a strategy for, and just the opposite, we're doing things that are actually making the problem even worse. Like, the problem's bad right now, but it's going to be even worse. Obviously, I live in Texas, and the number one provider of mental health services in the state of Texas is Harris County Jail. That's where you get mental health services here. So it's like, we got to solve this problem, but it feels like it's such a big macro problem that we kind of just tell people to get on the phone and figure out how to get their personal medical issues addressed. But it's like, this is so much bigger. And I was just curious about that. As somebody who's in the system, like, what would you do?
So we've got two balls at play here. We've got a macro conversation, and I'm kind of trying to dig into the micro part of this conversation. So I'd say anything is fair game now. And Chinga, I saw you on mic a bunch of times. I want to give you one more chance to speak, or forever.
First of all, I love ball. Second of all, I don't know where to go because, it's all over the place. I haven't been a teacher at a medical school for a while, but I was back in '94 in Chicago. And when Hillary Clinton was talking about socializing medicine, all of the medical students were ready to quit, because they weren't in it to help people, they were in it for the money. A lot of them, not all of them, have type A personalities, and sort of a comorbidity for type A personality. There's a lot of bipolarism, a lot of narcissism, a lot of borderline personality disorder, like lots of misfunction or dysfunction. And some of them I know, and I followed them, as friends through the career, and they did have mental breakdowns because they put a lot of stress on themselves, and of course nobody can meet that kind of standard when they put that standard on themselves, and then they make a lot of mistakes with patients and stuff like that. So yeah, the system is rigged towards a certain personality type who wants to just get in there and make money, and so they don't want to do mental health because they don't get paid a lot. My boss at University of Wisconsin-Madison, she was a transplant surgeon, and her official salary was $45,000 a year. And I said, well, how much do you really make? And she's like, well, I really make $135,000 a year, and that's low for a transplant surgeon. And I'm like, how do you make up the difference? And they said there's like all these billing tricks and stuff that they can do to up their salary from the base salary of $45,000. And she goes, but it's worth it for me to be here at a teaching hospital with some of the best transplant surgeons in the world and the most organs available. So Wisconsin, because there's a lot of drinking and a lot of winter sports, people go into creeks or lakes or run into a tree with their snowmobile. So there's a lot of organs available in Wisconsin. So she's like, I can't trade the short-term benefits of a high salary somewhere else for what I'm going to get out of here. So after I get out of here, I'm easily going to make $500,000 a year. So yeah, it's sort of a rigged system for a certain personality type. And the HMOs at the time sorry for people. So like I live on a reservation, right? And a lot of these people that are here are only here for a year, maybe two, because they got their medical education paid through the military or some other government program, and they don't really want to be here, and they never stick around. And if they can, if they write a senator or somebody they know back home, they can get out of it, and they do. So again, there are programs to cut the cost of medical education, but that doesn't matter. These students want to leave a rural area where they're not going to make much money, and they could help a lot of poor people, but they don't want to do that to get to some big city where they can make the big dollars, even if their education was paid for by the military or some other program. And the last thing I say is that they don't. And I was just in Washington D.C. for Bridge to AI, and this IT director named Michael Jang. He's like, I'm an ophthalmologist. I'm 60 years old. I've taught myself how to do all this artificial intelligence and use all these high-tech tools, but I go back to medical school and they're not teaching any of this stuff. And it's a crime that the public is paying all of this money to create these new data systems and new technologies, but the medical schools have not caught up, and these students have to come out of when they graduate and teach themselves, and that's dangerous. So yeah, it's a really messed up system. I've had to fix my chart a bunch of times because the doctors don't listen. They said I had high blood pressure. I have the opposite. I have low blood pressure. They said that I have heart disease. I have no heart disease. I went in as a vet to prove that I didn't have heart disease. Of course, I didn't. I don't have any arterial plaques or calcifications anywhere, and I'm 60 years old. But that's not what was recorded in my chart. And sometimes they don't fix it. Sometimes they won't fix it. They'll just say the patient called in and asked us to fix this chart, but they don't actually fix it.
That is an issue. Diagnostic codes do kind of follow you.
Yeah, well, and that's the problem. You end up being your chart, and you don't. You're not really what's wrong with you, and that just creates a whole hell of a lot of problems as you get older.
Let me finish. So the last thing was, I do pharmacogenomics for a living. That's my thing, right? And I do it for Native American people. And I was taking one of these proton pump inhibitors, which doesn't work for me. I mean, it doesn't reduce the stomach acid or the gastro reflux or anything like that, but it does cause me gout. And I told the doctor that, and he didn't believe me, and he said, just keep taking it anyway. And eventually I went to another researcher who's an expert in gout, and he's like, yeah, don't take those. It's not gonna help you. And so what's on my chart is I am non-compliant.
Oh, see, that's fucked up. But I'm sorry. That's my only way of saying it. That is actually a very, very stigmatizing term that could be based in some racialized prejudices, is my opinion. But I can't say that.
So, Chinga, you kind of answered a question that if our education system offered a lot more opportunities to people to go to school, get their costs covered, if they went, we have this rural, there's just no hospitals, no doctors, people are moving out of there. If there was a system that would say, you go to a rural area after school for however many years, 4 years, would it attract more people? And would that, you're kind of saying that people come but they won't stay. And that's a question that I have, because consistency of care and building that whole trust in your doctor and your medical care, especially in rural areas, that's a really important thing is they trust their doctors that have been their doctors and their families. You delivered me and you're gonna watch me die, that kind of a thing. But covering the costs of people to go to medical school, I think the return on investment of that would be so great. Probably not for insurance companies.
Well, This is the problem, right? You know, you can't be on welfare, you can't be on this, you can't be on that, because the rich people say you're lazy and you need to get to fucking work. But these kids that scam the system like this, they get away with it and nobody enforces the rules. Like if your education was paid for, then you have to do the public service for 3 years. You shouldn't be able to get out of it because you know a senator or somebody else powerful that's going to write you a letter saying why you need to forego your commitment. And then the beginning part is the application. Like I never took anything from well, I can't think of the name, but affirmative action, right? Because I had to grade, and I'm like, affirmative action is for brown or black people or minoritized people who don't have the grades and need the extra boost. I had the grades, I didn't use it, but it's all about integrity, right? So some of these people don't need these things, they don't need this help, and they take advantage of the free medical education, and then they get out of it at the other side. And what happens for the population is they already don't trust the medical system, and when you have a young person in there who you can tell doesn't want to be there, you have even less trust. And then they leave, and they're replaced by somebody else, you have even less trust. And they're inexperienced, so there's a bunch of crap in your medical records that doesn't make any sense. So you have one page from this doctor, another page from another doctor, and it just compiles into a bunch of nonsense. So my wife had kidney disease since she was 13 and high blood pressure. She didn't know until she married me and moved to Wisconsin, and the doctors finally got her file compiled, and they're like, yeah, this has been a problem for a long time. Nobody's treated to it. You treated you for it? She's like, no. And it's because of all these doctors that come in and out and don't want to stay here.
There's also the issue of, folks like myself who are in the training process or were in the training process, while we're in graduate school or medical school, are working either for free or for almost free. And the system itself is scaffolded on the backs of trainees. And so, our training is a 12-month stint wherever we go. And so I think that the answer to this was the public service loan forgiveness program that keeps people somewhere at least 10 years or within, doing kind of work where they're in a high need domain of their practice. But the issue here is that, as I've just pinned to the top of the room, so that's also now under attack, and they're using political rationale to essentially take away the 501c status of different sort of nonprofit medical clinics and community mental health clinics, because they are serving a population that's been deemed, like unclean or forbidden or whatever you want to call it. It's just, so they are now basically saying that, well, they're perpetuating some sort of criminal offense, and so that's really freaky. And I know I don't want to get too kind of unhinged here, so I'll just land by saying I don't like it.
What's the motivating factor? Let's try to be generous. Like, what's the side on the other side of this issue? Like, who benefits by stopping loan forgiveness? What's the good? Is there a good side of this that we're just not seeing? I would love somebody to clear that up for.
We've got 6 minutes left. I'm going to try to end on time, but I would love to hear answers to this question too, if anyone has any kind of insider knowledge, because I can't think of a good.
Well, the banks lose money, right? Don't the banks lose money when the loans are forgiven?
Okay, so you're saying there's a international finance kind of interest.
Yeah, I mean, I can view things through an economics lens, everything. So you when there's a law, when there's a rule, the number one question is who benefits financially from this.
So Sam, really quick. So my understanding was that before we had these IBR programs and IDR programs where people could pay 15% or 10% of their earnings to pay back their loans over time, that led to a forgiveness that was taxed at the end. And then this public service loan forgiveness is a 10-year forgiveness period without the tax bomb at the end. My understanding was that it was to protect first people from going into default, which I guess was happening with their student loans. So that's also a loss for the banks. And then the second thing was to get clinicians into the more high need community.
And are these federal loans that we're talking about? I mean, to me, it's like paying for the military, right? You need soldiers, so you pay for soldiers. Like, you need teachers, you need doctors. Like, you pay for what your society needs. That feels like a pretty solid economic investment.
Well, the agreement that's made early on was that essentially the federal government was sponsoring the banks, giving us the loans, and there's probably some kind of insurance in place there with the agreement. And part of that agreement was that over time the loan would be forgiven, and then Uncle Sam got to take their cut of the income tax at that final forgiveness. Interest is piling up, snowballing for some of us over the years. If you're in a 25-year forgiveness plan, paying only say like 10 or 15% of your loans, you can see how over time those that loan amount, the principal balance, doesn't actually shrink; it grows. And so then what happens at the end is the federal government gets this delicious tax payment from you, and the banks got you paying interest for how many years. So I would imagine that it's a pretty good trade-off, Sam. But
I don't know.
Well, we have a lot of new people here. I see you, Barbara, Dr. Francine. You really haven't spoken a whole lot, David. I think we actually ended up talking about a lot of the things you had brought up earlier, so I appreciate your comment earlier. It was very kind of pointed, almost kind of under the radar, and then we talked about a lot of the capitalistic problems with our healthcare system, even though that wasn't my goal. Steve, you're new here. We have a couple minutes left. Anyone want to say?
Thank you. I always appreciate it.
I have one other question. Does anybody know, banks get money from the government to loan out at a pretty low rate. Do you know how much they can add on to that rate they get from the government? Does anybody know that for a student loan? Or does it vary?
Are you talking about variable interest, fixed interest, or something?
No. So I'm a bank. I want to start giving out student loans. I can borrow money from the government at a certain interest rate, right? That's pretty low. It's not something consumers can get. And then, to make my profit, I add on some interest to that, right? So I don't know if there's a set amount that for student loans banks can charge, or what that amount is.
So there are loans that have fixed interest, there are variable interest, and there's private student loans that don't get the same protections, and those can be like credit cards.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like a fairly simple solution to this would be to say, you can get your loans at the post office, and you get them at the same rate the banks can borrow, and you have to pay them back, but you wouldn't be paying that exorbitant interest that can compound, and it seems like there are some fairly simple, if not solutions, some moderating things that they could do.
We were moving towards that. We were moving towards that with the SAVE Act, or not the SAVE Act, but the SAVE plan, which basically reduced the interest that people were being charged. It also capped out interest payments. For example, if you didn't have any income for a certain month, you would have a payment go towards forgiveness anyway, even at a zero payment, and you would have no additional interest compounded on. And so this was a way that they were keeping the snowball from growing. Now there's a very, very modified version of that plan that's on the table that basically locks people into a 30-year payment plan where they have to pay, I think, at minimum $10 a month, and they either you get forgiveness after 30 years, or you don't, and you just have to pay. There's something where basically you're getting kind of locked into payments forever, but there is some sort of concession they made around the interest that if you haven't paid back the full interest payment for that month, when you're early in the loan, then you wouldn't have that snowball out. So it locks people into paying back their loans all the way over a very long period of time, and I think without the prospect of forgiveness. But trying to close the room down, so if everybody has just sort of a final thing they'd like to say, that'd be great. Take a
Pay teachers more and help people get an education. Those are my two tips for the day. Pay teachers more. I mean, I think you said that the physicians at teaching hospitals make less than physicians at other hospitals. They should make more. It should attract the best. And why we don't do that? We go for quantity over quality. Go for quality all the time.
Thank you, Rick. Anyone else?
I think the reason it's different. I mean, when they lowball medical instructors, that's because they know that they're going to make up the difference in a lot of other ways. Because if you're in a teaching hospital, you're not just teaching and you're not just treating patients. You're going out on the lecture circuit and you're doing all kinds of other things. So you're going to make that money up just by your association with that teaching hospital. But I wanted to say that Sam already left. But Sam and I have been talking about doing a genetics lecture series and scientific discourse with, where they have John do physics and other people do other chemistry lessons or whatever. So look for that. Me and Sam are going to do genetics.
Great. Thank you, Chinga. Anyone else?
I think that Austin's question and comment was actually pretty interesting with the psychosomatic aspect of what we were talking about. I think that the mental health crisis is not talked about enough. There's not enough help, and that might be the reason why. So anybody who's able to, I guess this is also with the social isolation and loneliness epidemic, probably impacting people quite a bit. And so being social is actually very important, not only just for oneself, but for others in the community. And just actually being empathetic and compassionate towards others, and making sure to take time and energy out of one's life to be there and step it up for other people. Because it seems like, listening to the conversation, there isn't enough help for people out there. So teaching people to help themselves and help others is probably more important today than it has been for a while.
Thank you, Jude. Anyone else? Any final comments before we shut the room down?
I'm so grateful that your procedure went well yesterday and that you're feeling better and that you got access to the health care that you needed. And I'm just grateful. It's not anything to ever take for granted. You're lucky if you get to be well. So I'm just glad that went really, really well for you, and hopefully you're going to be clear and ready for your exam, and it's going to be a smashing success.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any other final comments?
I'm glad you're taking care of your health, Dr. James. And maybe in the spirit of what Chinga and Malincrot, some of the educators, Rick, we should take this offline to talk about Econ 101. Where does money come from? Because the banks don't borrow it from the government. We have a fractional reserve banking. They borrow it from us. And that's what is the tragedy of 2008. We never learned really how banking works, and how basically for every dollar every dollar deposited at a bank as a business, they then get to, because they have a charter from the government, issue 10 times that amount in loans. So money's actually created by banks, by us using them. And that's why when a long time ago Elizabeth Warren talked about postal banking, it might have been the fulfillment of what you were talking about. So access to is a great word, Denise. If only people had access to money like banks have access to it. That's my final word. We should probably break it off into a different, more educational kind of room.
Thank you, David. Anyone else? And I'll shut the room down. We have a couple people who didn't say anything. I'm happy to end.
Well, if you ever want to have a room about meditation, we can talk about it.
Everybody.
Thanks, dude. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I'm shutting the room down now. And a final mana. Do 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 do. Bye.
Sit down.
Exactly.
Sit down.
You broke.
And I got more than 30,000 in my account, little ass nigga. Mind your business.
Let's see.
You so bothered.
Let's see.
Like, let it go.
Let's see.
Sort of doing way too many YouTube videos, you know, the little TikTok videos, and I do want to talk about that a little bit because it's I probably shouldn't be looking at it because it really triggers me. But there are all these TikTok videos